Thank you, everybody, for coming today. This is obviously the latest in our electoral series of candidate visits. I am honored to have Kamala Harris here with us. She is running for State Attorney General. She is San Francisco's district attorney and has held that office since 2003. Prior to that, she worked in San Francisco, both with the city and district attorney's office, as well as Alameda. She is the Democratic nominee, and after a hard-fought campaign with a number of folks, it's nice to see her here. And we are going to have Steve Cooley on campus next week. We want to make sure that we are fair to both sides. And I just want to say really quick before I pass this over to David, for some of you who may wonder, does the AG in California matter or impact our work? And yes, the AG does. So when you think of topics, antitrust, piracy, privacy, patents, we are always involved and interacting with the AG. And it's my hope that our next AG will actually become a very strong ambassador to the attorneys general in a number of other states. It's something where we have growing relationships there, but to have our home state AG speak on the industry's behalf will be very important to us. And with that, I pass it over to David.
Well, thanks, Leslie, and thanks everybody for coming. I'm really, really honored to have Kamala Harris here at Google. She's someone I've known for some time and is one of our state's really fabulous public servants and officials. And so we really want to get a chance to let her share her vision about the state, the race that she's currently in. And to give, I've got a few questions, and I'll try to do my Charlie Rose routine here, but we really want to hear from you guys too. So, why don't we just kick it off? First, you're a native Californian. You're running for Attorney General. Some people might see the Attorney General's office as well. It's that lawyer thing, but it really is an important position, right? And has remarkable influence on what goes on in our state. So I wanted to ask you first off, why are you running?
Because I want to do the job.
Okay.
I actually really want to do the job. And why I'm running, another part of the answer is the same reason that I became a prosecutor. I'm one of two daughters of parents who met when they were graduate students at the University of California, Berkeley in the 1960s. Not your peers. And they met when they were actively involved in the civil rights movement. So that meant that my sister and I grew up pretty much surrounded by adults who spent full time marching and shouting about this thing we call justice. And growing up in that environment, the heroes for me were the architects of the civil rights movement, and they were the lawyers. So it was Charles Hamilton Houston and Thurgood Marshall and Constance Baker Motley, who were taking the skill of this great profession of law and translating the passion from the streets to the courtrooms of our country, and reminding the people who unfortunately needed to be reminded of that great promise we articulated in 1776, which is that we are all and should be treated and seen as equals. So I decided I wanted to be a lawyer at a very young age. I went to Howard University, and then I came back home to San Francisco and attended UC Hastings. And out of law school, I made the decision to become a prosecutor. And you can imagine, if you have any sense of who my family is, that was a curious decision.
Exactly.
In some ways, I had to defend the decision like one would a thesis. But what I said then is what I absolutely maintain today after a career as a prosecutor, which is that law enforcement has such a profound and direct impact on the most vulnerable among us, and has as its responsibility, as its job, to be a voice for the voiceless. And in the process of giving voice, also give dignity. And so that's the work that I decided I wanted to do. And I have prosecuted many cases. From the ground up, I've been in many courtrooms talking with juries about why in a civil and just society there will be severe and swift consequences when one human being kills another human being, or if a woman is raped or a child is molested, and talking about why that work is important if we are going to be committed to justice, which is the work of defending and being a voice for our most vulnerable.
Great. So again, you're running for a really important position in our state. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you think are California's biggest challenges and biggest opportunities right now?
Sure. The general point that I'd make about our challenges is that I think for too long, we in government and in public offices have not embraced what you have embraced, which is the importance of innovation. You know, if you look at any elected who's up for re-election, they will not take a political knock for doing things the way they've always been done. Good for you, Bob, you're doing things the way they've always been done. To engage in innovation in a position such as mine means to engage in what you all do, which is, by definition, to bring to bear some new idea or method or device. Well, what we all know about that process is that when one is engaged in innovation, no matter how well thought out, well planned, well conceived your idea may be, when you roll it out for the first time, there will probably be a glitch. But when you hold a position such as mine, you will read about that glitch on the front page of the newspaper. Which means that when you hold these positions, there is a great assumption of risk to take on innovation. And unless you have the courage combined hopefully with some political capital, there are seemingly few rewards for engaging in innovation, which is really unfortunate. My mother was a scientist. There is this wonderful word that has a great meaning, and it's called hypothesis, which means that you have an idea, and then it is well accepted, it will be tested, and then you will learn whether it was correct or not, but there will be no pride associated with the hypothesis, because after all, it was a hypothesis.
Right.
And then you will reconvene and then create a new hypothesis.
Right. Right.
But in government
like to call
and
it
in law
iteration at
enforcement,
Google.
right, exactly, right.
That's how we operate.
But in government, you know, when you have that idea, you better stick with it and defend it at all cost. And there is also part of the culture that suggests that you are doing a good job if you are strictly adhering to tradition, as opposed to measuring effectiveness with the infusion of metrics to look at whether we are actually producing what we all have a desire will be produced. Right. So if I can just keep going with this.
Please. No, great.
An example of what I am talking about in practice is in California on an annual basis, we release 120,000 prisoners because they have served their time. Within 3 years of their release, 70% reoffend. The word for that is recidivism, 70% recidivate. It's the highest recidivism rate in the country. So I think what is obvious about this is that anything with a 7 out of 10 failure rate is demanding some reconfiguration. But the other point is that it is extremely expensive, this failure, in terms of what it is costing us in a state that is on the verge of bankruptcy. It's a $10 billion slice in the annual budget. It is also extremely expensive in terms of what it is costing our public safety. So knowing that, I decided to create a reentry unit in my office, which is one of the only reentry units of a DA's office, and decided to focus on the 18 through 24-year-old, first-time, low-level, nonviolent drug sales offender. Called it the initiative Back on Track. Why that population? Well, when I was at Howard University, when we were all in college, we were 18 through 24, and we were called college kids. But when you're 18 and you turn 18 and you're in the system, you are considered an adult, period. Regardless of the fact that that is the very phase of life in which we have invested billions of dollars in this world in those places called colleges and universities, knowing that is the prime phase of life during which we mold and shape and direct a human being to become a productive adult.
Right.
So what I did is I called up a bunch of friends in the business community, the Chamber of Commerce. I called up other folks in the building trades unions and called up some of our faith-based and community nonprofits. And we addressed the fact that in this population, which is a very large population in the criminal justice system, a lot of them needed to get a GED and be enrolled in City College. Almost none of them have employable skills, so we enrolled them in the apprenticeship programs offered by the carpenters and the plumbers. And David, I'm going to ask you if you can create an apprenticeship program from them too.
Right.
We dealt with the fact that they also, many of them are parents who have a natural desire to parent their children, but not necessarily the skills. So we brought on board community-based folks to work on that. Over the course of the last 5 years, this initiative, Back on Track, has reduced the reoffense rate for this population from 54% to less than 10%. It's been so successful that the National DA's Association and the United States Department of Justice have designated it as a model of innovation for law enforcement in the United States. But there are risks associated with that.
Sure.
I will tell you, it was on the front page of a newspaper when one of the offenders, a couple of years into the program, went out and committed a horrendous crime. And he happened to also be an undocumented immigrant. And so then someone wrote an article and said, Kamala Harris has created a program to shield undocumented immigrants.
Right.
Right? These are the risks one
Sure.
assumes when they do something differently in government.
Right.
But I think that we are at a place in time, and especially in this great state, where we cannot afford to do business the way it has been done. We cannot afford to maintain status quo because we are really looking at a lot of broken systems. And this is where the culture of Google and the work that you all do is so very important and has to be shared with a much bigger audience, and in particular with people who hold offices like mine, which is that the best way that you become excellent and create models and improve the lives of people is when you are willing to invest in innovation and encourage a standard of business that is not based on an adherence to tradition, but instead based on what is your reason for being.
Right, right. Well, in some of your answers, you were touching on some of the themes of your book that
Yes,
that came out last year, Smart on Crime. And can you expand a little bit more on some of this? I mean, your one of your basic points was that law enforcement is not the only answer to reducing crime. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So the public health model is a tested, try and true model that tells us about a health epidemic, what I think we should think about when we think about a crime epidemic. Public health model tells us this: health epidemic, best way to deal with it, prevention. If the sniffles take hold, early intervention. But if we're at the point of dealing with it in the emergency room, it's too late and it's too expensive. So too for criminal justice policy. We have to recognize that we have been, I think, misguided for a long time in terms of how we categorize one's criminal justice policy perspective. We have suggested there are only two. You are either tough on crime or you're soft on crime, instead of asking, are we smart on crime? That's the title of my book. Which means let us recognize, absolutely, let's react with certainty and swiftly after a crime has occurred. I've raised the conviction rates in my office to the highest they've been in 15 years, in particular for serious and violent crime. I have personally prosecuted homicide cases. I am all about locking up somebody who rapes a woman, molests a child, or murders a human being. That being said, I took an oath to be concerned about public safety and your safety. And if I'm going to be most effective that way, I cannot be limited to reacting after a crime occurs. We must also be equally invested with the equal amount of passion in preventing a crime before it occurs. But status quo has suggested that the way that one is effective in these positions is to talk tough. Talk tough around reacting. And then if you talk about other issues, that's soft. Well, I would suggest to you that's misguided and incorrect. So the book I wrote divides it into, there are two halves. And so the first half, I have several chapters that address what I believe are myths about the criminal justice system that have impeded better and smarter criminal justice policy. In the second half of the book, I talk about best practices from around the country. So an example of a myth, it's a myth. Children are resilient. So we have public policy that has been built up around the idea that whatever happens to a child, they'll grow out of it. Or look at little Johnny, he's playing in the playground, he's fine. Instead of recognizing that whatever especially traumatic event happens to a child will ever be imprinted in the life of that person if we don't take seriously what is happening with that child when they are a child. But you see, we have marginalized issues that impact children. We have decided, I guess, because they're small people, those are small issues. Or we have decided that's something women care about, or parents care about, or people who care about cute, cuddly things care about. instead of recognizing it is smarter, it is more effective, and it is cheaper to address an issue that impacts a child while they are a child than to wait until they become the adult who everyone's knocking on my door about, when what happened when they were 6 would have absolutely predicted what they're doing when they're 16.
Right.
So an example of that is an initiative that I started. I'm just going.
No, keep going, keep going. I'm going to stop you in a minute.
Okay. An example of this is I did an assessment of who the homicide victims were in San Francisco who were under the age of 25 when they were killed. Because we had a rash of homicides, and I wanted to know what's going on here. Who are they? Let's not just accept this. Well, I learned the data came back, 94% of them are high school dropouts. So then I went over to the school district and I asked the superintendent, what's going on? She said, well, Kamala, of the few number of children we have in the public school system in San Francisco, 5,500 have been designated as habitually and chronically truant. And of the 5,500, 2,400 are elementary school students. Missing, by the way, 60, 70, 80 days of a 180-day school year. So I asked the superintendent to convene a meeting for me with all the principals and administrators of the San Francisco Unified School District, and she did. And I stood before them in a high school auditorium, a local high school auditorium, and I shared with them a fact about myself. I'm a product of California public schools. And my first grade teacher, Mrs. Frances Wilson, God rest her soul, attended my law school graduation. I would not be standing here or sitting here were it not for the education I received. And I believe a child going without an education is tantamount to a crime. So I declared that I decided I'm going to start prosecuting parents for truancy. Well, if you all know anything about San Francisco politics, you'll know half the room booed and the other half stood up and clapped. And let me tell you, and my staff went bananas because it was before we knew if I was going to have an opponent in my reelection race, and they were like, can't you wait? Everyone's going to be mad at you. And I said, look, I'm done, and I've got some political capital, and I'm going to spend some of it. And this is what we did. Well, one of the things about my job is the job comes with a badge, and there is an artistic rendering of said badge on my stationery. So on my letterhead, I sent out to every parent in the San Francisco Unified School District a letter outlining the direct connection between elementary school truancy, high school dropout rates, who will be a victim of crime, who will be a perpetrator of crime. So a friend of mine called me up. He said, Kamala, my wife got the letter. She freaked out. She called all the kids into the living room, held up the letter, said, if you don't go to school, Kamala's going to put you and me in jail. Intended effect. And then what we also did, my friend, is we set up what we call the DA mediation program, where I assigned prosecutors to go and meet with the principals when they were meeting with these hundreds of parents. Now remember, this had never been done in my office before. So when I created it, I had to take volunteers from my office. You know the prosecutors who volunteered? My gang prosecutors and my homicide prosecutors. And so I'd say, when you go over there, look really mean, which wasn't hard because they look like they're mean dudes. And so, you know, they were sitting there and the parent was like, well, who's the mean looking dude? And there's like, that's someone that mean DA Kamala Harris sent over here because she said she's going to start prosecuting you if we can't work this out. And this is what we found. We found cases like the case of the woman who by herself was raising her 3 children, holding down 2 jobs and homeless. She just needed some help. But by shining this infrared light of our public safety on the fact that her children are not in school, and asking the question about why her children aren't in school, we were able to figure it out and get her access to services that exist. Of course, her children's attendance improved. We dismissed the charges against her. And over the course of this initiative, we have improved attendance for this population, which has been the elementary and middle school population, by 30%.
Right.
So I would suggest that there are many approaches that we can take, recognizing the power of these offices, and also recognizing that we can have some impact if we are willing to have the courage to reconfigure so that we don't run away from our core function, but also realize how we can actually do better.
Right, great. Well, I wanted to I'm sure that issue is going to come up again in the Q&A period, and I want to get back to issues again in a minute, but I want to talk for a minute about the race a little bit. So your opponent, you're the DA of San Francisco, your opponent's the district attorney of Los Angeles. You know, some might say, similar, resumes. And so what are the differences? I mean, how's the state going to be better if you're the Attorney General and not Mr. Cooley?
Well, I know that I read that at the Republican convention, he called me a radical. So I guess that's one difference between us. And yeah, I am a radical. I do
Okay.
believe that we need to get radical about what we are doing and
Right.
take it seriously.
Right.
I'd say the difference between us is really the difference between the defense of status quo and what we should be willing to do to be critical of existing systems and then adopt innovation and move forward. So, for example, one of my key areas of focus, which will not be the subject of any television commercial we do because this is the other thing about politics of running for office. It can be very frustrating as a candidate because the public appetite is, and the way the system is set up is that the most people I can talk with I will be able to talk with them through television. Right? When I ran for DA in San Francisco, I was at bus stops shaking hands at 6 o'clock in the morning. This is the largest geographically and by population size, largest state in the country. The only way I will shake the hand of every voter is through television. At a cost of $2 million a week, by the way. It's crazy, and we need to talk to them for at least 6 weeks. So that being said, television commercials become the key and way that we speak with voters. Well, those television commercials are exactly 30 seconds. And so it's a challenge for someone like me because there's a lot I obviously want to talk about to be able to communicate with voters around the priorities. That being said, that's a long way of saying one of my priorities that will probably not be the subject of any television commercial because it probably falls under the category of the mundane, seemingly mundane, is this important issue of the adoption of technology by law enforcement in particular and government in general. When I was elected district attorney of San Francisco in 2004, San Francisco, the first cousin to Silicon Valley, 2/3 of my lawyers did not have email. We are still rolling out email in the San Francisco Police Department. This is the reality of it. The reality of it is when you pull back the way government works, pull that curtain back, it's like watching that little guy in The Wizard of Oz. It's an amazing thing anything gets done. It is extremely obsolete in the way that our systems are functioning, and there has to be change. And the Attorney General of the state of California can provide that kind of leadership and change. And why is that important? It's obvious, the obvious point is that anything should be upgraded from the 20th to the 21st century. But let's make a more practical reason for why it's important. I'll give you 2 reasons, specifically, that I think most people would appreciate. 1, police officer is pulling someone over for a broken taillight. Well, that person is wanted in another jurisdiction for an armed robbery. That police officer probably won't know that. So that presents the challenge of 1, police officer is risking his life when he gets out of the car to write that ticket because that driver knows what he's wanted for. 2, God willing, police officer goes back, he's safe. Armed robbery's just gone free. Another side of that coin is one of the biggest and most prevalent crimes that is occurring in our state and in our country and going without consequence is identity theft.
Yeah.
And you know why it's going without consequence? Because the infrastructure has not the skills to do all of the work that is necessary to put those crimes together. It's that basic. It's that basic. There has to be an adoption of technology by law enforcement and government in general, if for no other reason because we know that the best tool that we have in most systems, in particular in government and law enforcement, is our ability to communicate. And isn't that the very core reason for being of technology, which is to allow us to communicate effectively and efficiently and with speed and accuracy? So, that's another priority for me. I don't, you can ask him what he thinks about these things, but I haven't heard him talk about it.
Right.
There's another issue that would be a very big difference between us. And I've challenged him for the last 6 months. He has not taken a position in terms of AB 32, which is a law that we passed with bipartisan support in California to say that we want high standards around greenhouse gas emissions, that we want to be a leader and that we want to hold ourselves or as a state strictly accountable so that we can reduce and we can encourage green technologies and we can encourage all of the work that you all are doing here around, in this area and other parts of the state around solar panel tech and building economies and all of this, right? Well, this is what AB 32 would encourage and facilitate. There's a proposition on the November ballot called Proposition 23, which would push, as it purports, a pause button on AB 32, but I will tell you it will kill AB 32. My opponent has failed
People
to take...
should know Google is on record against
That's great.
Prop 23. So.
That's great. And my opponent refuses to take a position on that. When I was first elected DA, I created an environmental justice unit for the same reason. We have to upgrade the way we think of our responsibility. My job is to absolutely protect my constituency from all the crimes we've already discussed, but as important and imminent a threat to your health and safety as is any crime we've discussed, so too are crimes being committed against our environment. And so we have to create an institutional commitment to that issue. And that means creating units where there is a specialization that is cultivated and enhanced and grown. I've done that.
Right.
He has decimated his unit in his office and has not taken a position on AB 32. I think that's a problem. I think it's a problem that he has said that he will join with southern states' attorneys general and join the suit challenging the administration's health care reform, which of course I think is an absolute misuse of limited resources in the state and not in the best interest of the people in the state, a lot of whom are uninsured and who need access to affordable health care. And when the Attorney General of the state of California starts weighing in on these very, very important issues that have national implication, when the Attorney General weighs in of California, that's the big dog. And it can be a game changer. So all of those issues, I think, are very much at play in this election and differences between he and I.
Now, I assume that you probably also differ on Prop 8. And,
oh, absolutely.
And
so he has said,
thank
you, and he has said he would defend Prop 8. I have been very clear in my opposition to Prop 8, and at this point in time, I think it is inappropriate at best for anyone running for Attorney General of the state of California to say they would do anything other than stand down when a federal judge has said that it is unconstitutional, again, with limited resources in a state that is on the verge of bankruptcy. One should not be using the resources, the limited resources and power of that office to defend a law that has been found by a judge to be unconstitutional. A law that, by the way, the current Attorney General and current governor have agreed is an unconstitutional law.
So let's talk about the politics of the race for a second. Yes, so a lot of differences, pretty clear choice here, but a little bit about the politics of the race. So he's from LA elected official in LA County, biggest county in the state. You've got a statewide, at the top of the Republican ticket, you have a candidate who's spending lots and lots of money. What do you need to do to win?
It's so crude, David. I need to raise a ton of money. It's the reality of running statewide, and there's no other way to talk with voters other than talking with them through television, and it's so extremely expensive. And for all I have said about my disagreements with my opponent, I will say this: I take him very seriously, and he's absolutely formidable. He's in his third term as District Attorney of Los Angeles. It is the county with the largest population in the state. And so he is a very significant opponent. We are neck and neck in the polling. Right now, there's one poll that shows him about 3 points ahead of us, which means, statistically we're in a dead heat. We're neck and neck in fundraising. And there's a lot at stake. And, I should add, because the commercials will start airing soon anyway, so he's going to start adding all these, running all these hit pieces against me, as he's been talking about in all these meetings. I am personally opposed to the death penalty. But as I've said, I will follow the law, and my position on the death penalty is the same as 4 of the last 9 attorneys general. My opponent will use that as a soft on crime card to suggest that I am not committed to doing the work that needs to be done by law enforcement, which is absolutely incorrect, as evidenced by the fact that I have the highest conviction rates that we've had. So there are a lot of issues that are going to come up that are going to be red herrings in this campaign, because I will tell you that among the many important issues that people are facing right now, at the top of that list is jobs, is they want more efficient systems. I've done a whole body of work around mortgage fraud. Let's talk about that for an example. There are all these families in this state who are doing everything they were supposed to do to live the American dream. And the American dream tells us, and told them, go out and buy a home, pay your bills on time, your taxes on time, your mortgage on time. And they did all that. And then they found they were out of work. And there are predators who have come in the form of brokers to financial institutions, who have literally stripped these folks of their few remaining assets and all their dignity. And this is another crime that has gone absolutely without consequence based on its prevalence. I have a whole body of work in my office doing that. It's been so successful that we applied for a very competitive grant from the federal government, which we brought home to San Francisco to create a standalone mortgage fraud unit, $1 million grant. So I've done that work. I would suggest to you that's a priority. I would suggest to you the conversation we're having about the environment is a priority. I would suggest to you that there is a huge priority around making clear the connection between public safety and public education, and using the power and the bully pulpit of the office to say you care about your personal safety, well then you really should care about the education of other people's children. These are very, very important issues. And I promise you that the way that you will see the attacks come at us will be to bait people into extreme ideological ends instead of to talk about what is just practically what we should be discussing and be concerned about. And in this way, I do see most of these issues as nonpartisan, to be honest. And I think for too long we have suggested that they are partisan or ideological issues when they're not. I've never seen anybody go up and before they rob somebody, ask them what party they're registered to. Just doesn't happen.
Yeah, fair enough. So before we open it up to audience questions, I wanted to cover a couple of other basically nonpartisan issues that address some of the things we do around the shop here at Google. One of those is online privacy. Now, in the primary, I know you had criticized your opponent for sort of being lax and not sufficiently concerned, if you will, about online privacy or violations of online privacy with social networks and so forth. So I wanted to hear from you a little bit about how you think about that issue, and given how quickly the technology is moving, given how powerful a lot of these tools are, if you have a vision for regulating it or doing something to enforce the law around it, how do you do that? How do you think about that, and how do you do that without stifling the kind of innovation that you're seeing in this whole area?
So, as a lawyer, you know, we all know the Constitution of the United States has a Fourth Amendment, and that is the law that surrounds what is reasonable and unreasonable search and seizure. And so underlying all of any analysis about what would be a reasonable or unreasonable taking of your stuff by government or anybody else is the concept of what is a reasonable expectation of privacy. So the laws that have been written and are on the books to deal with this issue of privacy are laws that developed primarily, and this gets back to the 20th century versus the 21st century world, right? The laws are still very much grounded in the 20th century and before. So the laws that came up around privacy were developed around literally the structure of a house. Well, what can you see from the street if you were looking through the window of that house? Versus what you would be able to see or take if you opened the door of that house. Versus what, right? What is your reason, versus what you're doing in the front yard of that house.
Sure.
And so what expectation of privacy do you attach to whatever is placed in that particular place as it relates to that house? So, given where we are now, so you're now no longer are you necessarily keeping those private files in some file cabinet that's locked in the basement of the house. It's on your laptop, and it's then therefore up here in this cloud that exists above us, right? It's no longer in a physical place. And so we have to, lawyers, judges, government, realize that times are changing.
Sure.
And we're going to have to figure out a way to adapt and adapt to the realities of where we are. You know, other laws that deal with, for example, copyright existed, and theft. Let's use theft as an example. Well, theft was always, and our laws regarding theft were always based on the idea that I would take something from you and deprive you of possession of that thing. Well, now because of technology, I can take something from you because I copy it, but you still have it. right?
Yeah, so you're taking the value of it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so, but we haven't adjusted. And frankly, part of the problem, I think, is also that there's a lack of understanding of what you all do by me and many others.
Yeah.
And that's a gap that has to be recognized, and we have to do something consciously
Right.
to close that gap.
I mean, because one of the concerns, I mean, you go back to privacy, you said times are changing, and it's not, 21st century is very different than
Yeah.
the 20th century. Well, one of the ways in which it's different is people have a lot more interest or a lot less concern about making information that heretofore was private, either because they wanted it to be private or because it was simply obscure, right, and
That's
hard
right.
to find.
That's exactly right.
And now, of
That's
course,
right.
technology makes it easy to find.
That's
and
right.
in a lot of cases, the culture, there are arguments about whether the culture really is changing, but people want to share more.
Yeah.
So the concern of a lot of folks, in the Valley and who work in this area is that law enforcement, government, policymakers are going to do things to protect users and people from themselves, because there's some sense of 20th century privacy that has to be protected. How do you respond to that?
That there's a balance that has to be struck. So one of the issues that has come up that is a kind of high-profile issue on this point, it relates to children and their use of technology in a way that may harm them. And so I would suggest to you, based on the work that I've done, that the best way to deal with that is prevention, which means educating the parents and teachers and the community that is raising that child to understand the technology in a way that they can teach the child what we otherwise teach children when we cross a street. Don't just look at the light, look both ways before you cross. Don't talk to a stranger, and the stranger is someone you've never seen before, but stranger is defined a little differently when you're interacting with someone on a social networking site.
Right.
So that's part of it. And I think the other part of it is just also having some commitment to an understanding that the technology that is coming right out of our backyard, and this is where I have a certain bravado about being a California kid. I mean, I do, which is, it's right here. And the next Attorney General of California should be the go-to person for how we should be handling these cases in the country. And in that way, I approach my thoughts about this with a deep understanding that we're just at the beginning of where this can go. And we really don't want to stand in the way of its potential and its development. Like what's happening now with broadband.
Right.
And how that's going to change the potential and expanse and availability. It's profound. And so there has to be some balance struck between what is an immediate issue that is literally causing harm to the lives of people versus, to your point, changing laws to adapt to, those points that you've made.
Right. Well, let me I want to open it up in a minute. I'm going to ask one more question, and then people we've got mics on either side. So as I'm asking this question and Kamala's answering, maybe you can get up and prepare yours. But one other question related to that. So antitrust.
Yes.
Competition law. So that's obviously in an area that is not unknown to Google.
Yeah.
And you're seeing state attorney generals have become much more active in that area. And to your last point about not standing in the way, about making sure there's a balance, a lot of us are concerned, sometimes that, given how quickly our industry moves, how quickly things, there was, when I was, first hanging out with Larry and Sergey 12 years ago, everybody thought, search, why are you doing a search startup? That business is done, it's over.
Right.
There's nothing more to do there. And of course, within a few years, people saw it was very, very different. And so things move so quickly. Mere success at a given point and a snapshot in time does not mean dominance or monopoly power and all those kinds of things.
Or an era or anything.
or any of those things,
Right.
because these things can go away in a heartbeat, and that's why we live sort of in fear of the other folks in a garage somewhere.
Right.
So, how do you think about that? I mean, it's how do you think about enforcing antitrust? And again, as you said, it's happening here. So there's a big interest in the government of California to make sure that this industry is thriving. So
absolutely right.
How do you strike this balance?
I think you've articulated it. I mean, it really is. We cannot be short-sighted.
No.
And so that's part of it. And so it is to recognize that we have to allow these businesses to develop and grow, because that's where the models will be created. And it's also it's incremental in many ways. To your point, this then grows to its maximum potential and is the board from which another thing leaps. And so we have to understand these systems and how they can, and not do it again despite, to save our nose despite our face, because the other aspect, I think to your point, is this is a very significant source of California's economy. And if we, a state on the verge of bankruptcy, want to do something about that fact, we're going to have to recognize we cannot stand in the way of business growth and development. And that we don't have to accept false choices. That doesn't have to be to the exclusion, for example, of protecting consumers.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be to the exclusion of going after bad businesses, because bad businesses are not good for good businesses.
Right, fair enough.
So,
Good, well, we've got some questions. Why don't we start on this side of the room?
Sure. My name is Justin Liu, and I was wondering if you thought 3 strikes was constitutional, given that nonviolent offenders could get life sentences, and also if you think it needs to be reformed in either the law or how it's implemented, and if so, how.
that's a great question, Justin. Thank you. So 3 strikes is a law that came about now 12 years ago in California. It was based on that baseball analogy, 3rd strike, you're out. And it came out of a horrible case involving a little girl by the name of Polly Klaas, who was horribly killed. And turned out the guy who did it had prior incidents. And so everyone said, well, how could he have been left to be on the street to do this one when he had done that kind of thing before? And there was an appropriate kind of emotional response to her case, but it ended up being, good public policy should not be driven by emotion. And what ended up happening was that a law was created and passed based on an appropriate emotional reaction to what happened to her. But it was written in such a way that if a person had a serious and violent first offense, they'd do that time. If they had a second one, they'd do twice the time. And then if they had a third one, but the law was written, third of any kind of felony, to your point, even a nonviolent, they would do 25 to life. I disagree with that. My policy in my office is on my website. It hasn't changed, which is that we will not seek a 25-year to life sentence unless the third offense is of a serious or violent nature, with very few exceptions. And there have been a number of cases that have come down to kind of restrict the application of that law.
Great. Next question over here.
Yeah, so obviously California is pretty cash-strapped at the moment and will continue to be in the years ahead. And I mean, I recently learned that we're also spending 11% of our budget on prisons and keeping people incarcerated. And I mean, the United States also has one of the highest incarceration rates in the world. I was wondering your thoughts on the Attorney General's role in that issue, especially in the short term.
So I talked about Back on Track, my initiative, which was absolutely designed to deal with your point. We have a 7 out of 10 rate of failure in terms of the recidivism rate. 70% recidivate within 3 years of their release in California. Everyone would read about it on the front page of the paper for the last several months. Oh my God, prisons are overflowing, they're overcrowded. Oh my God, there's going to be early release of prisoners. Problem, problem, problem. I would suggest to you that's not true. It's a symptom of the problem. The problem is we have a revolving door of crime in California that we need to shut. So, what am I talking about? The average prison sentence in California is 24 months. You can infer 2 facts from that. One, the average person being sentenced to prison is not being sentenced for a serious or violent crime because, as we've discussed with the 3 strikes question, that's going to be 10, 15, 25 to life. The other thing that tells you, the other fact, they're all coming out. And we have no meaningful criminal justice policy for dealing with that fact. So we're just ostriches. So we lock them up, good, we're done with that guy. Well, 7 out of 10 of them are going to go right back in, and we have no plan when they get out of prison after serving their time for re-entering them. So they do the predictable because, by the way, since they committed the last crime, the only changed circumstances, they've been in prison with a bunch of other folks. Right? So we have to have meaningful criminal justice policy to deal with this issue of recidivism, to reduce the burden on our criminal justice system, which is costing us, to your point, $10 billion a year in California, in a state that's on the verge of bankruptcy. So I believe one very discrete and specific area of focus, which would yield huge rewards, is to focus on the issue of recidivism, and in particular, re-entering former offenders, and doing what we can to reduce the likelihood that they will reoffend. And then on the fiscal point, I'll share with you. It costs me $10,000 every time I prosecute a felony. It costs us $35,000 a year to house someone in the county jail. It costs $51,000 a year to house someone in the state prison. My reentry program, Back on Track, costs less than $5,000 per participant. Right? And you're having an impact on whole families when you do that work. So again, it's back to the question about the difference between me and my opponent. You know, I'm sure someone would say, oh, of course she's doing that. That's not tough. Well, I'm sorry, so it's just tough to keep reacting to known, you know, that you can just predict they're going to come out and just knock them right back in, knock them right back in. How about shutting that door so they're not going back in? And that's what I'm talking about, and I think you are too.
Yeah,
All right, next question over here. I can be able to predict what it'll be about.
Actually, I'm going to angle it off.
Okay.
So, as many Googlers and San Franciscans, I'm a pretty radical civil libertarian, and that's hence my objection to the attendance thing. But can you give me a counterexample? Give me an example where, because to me, your smart also kind of means potentially ends justify the means in terms of preventing crime ahead of time. Can you give me an example of where you've had a policy that you thought might be effective, but for civil liberty reasons, privacy or intrusion into people's lives, you've made the decision that that's not a good policy for the state or the city to be following? A time where you've sort of backed off on that and said, you know what, that's too much, that's too digging into people's lives?
That's a wonderful question. The one that comes to mind, and I'm sure there's more than one. The one that comes to mind most recently, back to the question, was around the concern about known sexual offenders using social networking sites. And I was very much in favor of regulating or restricting access. And when I started to think more about it and receive more information, I realized that that would have been too expansive and would have restricted a lot of people who should not be restricted. So what we did is I changed the definition of social network sites to reflect more the federal definition, which would include, that it's a substantial number of users are minors. Looking at how we can, and then in terms of which sex offenders, let's restrict that to those that are most likely. So that is probably one. It would have been easy to go with the more expansive one. It would have been politically appear tougher, but I did reduce the scope of the focus because of my concern for your point. And I do want to say something else that I think is another distinction between me and my opponent.
It's a campaign.
It's a campaign. No time to be modest at all. With 49 days to go. I see the role of this office, Attorney General, as being very similar to how I've tried to use my role as district attorney. So there is the statutory and technical responsibility of the office. And then there is the bully pulpit that comes with the office. I have microphones in front of me all the time. And hopefully I am educating myself about issues and being informed by people who understand issues more than I do, in a way that when I'm in front of that bully pulpit, I'm speaking in a responsible way and hopefully educating the public. And then the third role is the incredible power that one has in these positions to convene, which again is about bringing smart people into the room to say, will you all come together with me? And then maybe some people who are, in a different component of, or sector of our community or our lives, come together around my table. I've done this so many times, David. Come together, will you guys come together for an hour? I've got an idea, and just come around my conference table and let's play around with the idea. And invariably in the course of that 1 hour, we are breaking through silos But also, during the course of that 1 hour, there's invariably some plan for what we can do going forward to be better, to be more effective, to create synergy. And so I will say this, I'm very comfortable admitting what I don't know. And I enjoy and I am best when I make a decision after I have heard from a lot of people. I like making decisions like that. I like being surrounded by smart people. I have no problem admitting I don't know that. And I think you want that in your office holders, because the power we have, you know, the power I have as a prosecutor is that with a swipe of my pen, I can charge someone with a misdemeanor, the lowest level offense possible. And by virtue of that swipe of my pen, you will have to go to a courthouse and stand in line. You will have to come out of pocket and hire an attorney. You may get arrested for a few hours. You will be embarrassed in your community. You will miss time from coming onto the Google campus, all because with the swipe of my pen I've charged you with a crime, which I may choose to dismiss 2 weeks later. It's an incredible amount of power. And you want to make sure that the people who have this kind of power are taking seriously the responsibility in terms of understanding, as much as anything, the impact on the people who will be affected by that.
Absolutely.
You know.
Great. Well, next question.
You've outlined the issues you consider important pretty clearly, but from a practical perspective, can you explain or clarify some of the actions that you'll take when you first come into office and
Sure.
how you'll prioritize them?
Yeah, that's great. Well, one of the first actions is I'm planning on doing an audit of the office. And I did that when I was first elected DA. And I'll tell you why, many reasons. But mostly because when you come in as the head of an organization, there will be a bunch of squeaky wheels, which will demand a lot of your attention and time. They're going to be just banging cymbals. And invariably, though, when you look into it, you will find that it's the guy who's down the hall and around the corner under that green visor that is the one who's actually making the whole train run. And if you start making decisions about how you're going to prioritize resources, how you're going to distribute resources around what is obvious, you're probably going to make some mistakes. So the first thing that you always have to do in these offices, and this gets back to the seemingly mundane, which is absolutely critical to doing the broad sweeping work, to the point of your question, you have to know where everything is. And you have to figure that out pretty quickly so that you can then start to make the decisions that are consistent with your policy priorities. So that's one of the first actions I plan on taking.
Okay. Hopefully we can. You have time to get these last
absolutely.
three questions. Okay.
Yes,
Let's
absolutely.
go here and there and then
have
back again.
Yeah, good.
Okay, hi, my name is Joanne Seiben, and I have a question for you about the cost of incarceration versus apprenticeships. And the context is, I've been reading a number of studies lately that suggest that despite our grievous unemployment figures, we actually are suffering a shortage of highly skilled blue-collar workers,
Absolutely.
electricians, plumbers, solar technicians, auto mechanics, et cetera. So could you compare, two-part question, could you compare the cost of incarceration versus apprenticeship programs? And given that it seems so blatantly, obviously a good solution all around, why have such programs failed to gain a huge amount of traction so far? Is it lack of leadership, political will, funding? What's going on?
And you're talking about around skills development around known offenders?
Right.
Yeah. So the cost is, like I was saying, for Back on Track, for example. $10,000 prosecute a felony, $35,000 a year house somebody in a county jail, $51,000 a year house someone in a state prison. My initiative Back on Track costs less than $5,000 per participant. And it includes not just a skills development, but it actually looks at the participants, in a holistic way, understanding their lives are as multifaceted as ours. So it's about their need for childcare, their need for housing, their need for clearing up their credit, some basic stuff. I would say that part of the problem, I'm a little bit of a nerd. And anyway, I've done a study of the criminal justice system in the United States. And just simply put, there was once upon a time, there was this thing called the war on poverty. But it was a great idea, and it was really short-lived. And then it became the war on crime. And then it became the war on drugs. Then there was this guy by the name of Michael Dukakis that decided to run for president of the United States. And it turned out this guy, Michael Dukakis, had been governor of this state called Massachusetts. And when he was governor, there was this guy by the name of Willie Horton, who was on a furlough program that was a job training program. And this guy, Horton, went out and committed a horrendous crime. And then this other guy, Michael Dukakis, because of that, lost the election. And all of a sudden, the word rehabilitation was synonymous with soft on crime. And all of a sudden, and I'm, this is the general kind of crude analysis, but true, you can track it and see. All of a sudden, it was not the tough thing to talk about when you talked about the crime problem, to talk about a focus on rehabilitation as part of the solution. And it was abandoned. And frankly, to be very candid with you all, I rarely use the word rehabilitation. I talk about reduction of recidivism, because it just lost its true meaning. It became soft on crime. It became, let me tell you a word you've probably never heard, that I've heard in many circles. It's a hug-a-thug program. Isn't that the most offensive term you've ever heard? It's a hug-a-thug program. Wow. This is the mindset. And so you have where we are now. And so back to the question from the fellow who was over here. So we're much more prepared to put $10 billion a year in California into locking people up instead of into a holistic approach. And by the way, nothing I'm saying should be confused to be anything other than saying when somebody commits a crime, they must be held accountable. I've spent my whole life locking people up. So I'm not suggesting you let people get away with it. I'm not suggesting that people shouldn't go to jail. But there are cycles and there are systems, and we have to look beyond the one criminal case, and we have to look at the crime problem. And that's how criminal justice policy should be designed.
It sounds like you're describing a lack of political courage and a lack of political will. How do you break through that?
Or creativity.
Even creativity. But if basically the view is you don't get elected if you talk about this stuff, or if you try to do these things, maybe you'll get run out of office. How's it ever going to happen?
I think that people are smarter than we give them credit for.
Okay.
I think that if you start talking about it in a way that, I mean, here's the other part of what, let me tell you why I wrote the book. I wrote the book because I wrote it hoping it would be ready in time for the Denver convention, for the Democratic convention when we elected the president. Because I was so sure there was going to be this robust debate on criminal justice policy, right. And so I wanted to hopefully help inform that debate. And of course, there was no debate on criminal justice policy, right. Because to talk about criminal justice policy is to assume such a prickly subject, if you're going to be reasonable, right. That nobody wants to bring it up. Right. But that being said, I have, as the Democrat from San Francisco in the primary with 6 opponents, we took LA, we took Orange County, we took Fresno, we took San Diego. Mm-hmm. And I have stood in living rooms in Riverside and in Orange County and places that are considered conservative. I talked about these issues and people get it. I think when you talk to people in a way that is just about what is pragmatic and realistic, and it's about just, not about ideology, they get it. And so I'm willing to take that risk.
Let's try to get the last 2 questions in quickly,
okay.
Right over here.
Mine will be really quick. I'm on the online...
My answer probably won't be.
I think it probably will be. I'm on the online media team here at Google, and you mentioned that there's no other way to reach voters other than through TV.
Question.
Beg
to differ.
Have you explored the media tools that we have here at Google?
Will you help me?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
Come sit up here, or we'll find you after. I mean that, though. I really do, because I'm sure we have not as much as we should. Thank you. Thank you. That's
Last
great.
question over here.
My question is going to be somewhat in a similar vein.
Oh, good. Good. I want your help, too.
So my question is, you obviously talk about bringing the criminal justice system from the 20th century into the 21st century.
Yeah.
And of course, some of the common examples of email and so forth and connectivity, right. Are obviously resounding. But are there other concrete things that, which are perhaps sort of leading edge or bleeding edge that you're thinking about, and how you are you thinking about enlisting some of these, or the most innovative companies, in the space who are in the Valley, to sort of help, lead that in that and set a model for the country, or maybe even more broadly.
Absolutely.
As opposed to completely, leading from the political side, which obviously,
Oh, no, I don't think it can happen that way. I agree with you completely. It can't happen that way. And absolutely. I've been wanting to come to the Google campus for a year and a half. Let me just be clear about that. I'm so happy I'm here right now. But I've been wanting to come because I want these relationships. And I want to cultivate them because I want you to be an advisory group. And I want to be able to say, look, guys, this is what I've got. Tell me, what do you see as the way that we get to where we need to be? What does the design look like? And that's going to be around everything in terms of how we're communicating online, to what we're doing around creating systems that are about, keeping and warehousing information and data, to what we can be doing around just upgrading all of the pure kind of communication systems that exist and should exist within government. So we can increase accountability and effectiveness and reduce human error and all of that. And I am positive that the skill set to be able to get where we need to be is not going to be inside necessarily. It's going to be about our friends coming in to give the help and the assistance to upgrade us. And so I agree with you completely. And I love having advisory committees. I have a few that I rely on completely. And on this issue of technology, there's no question that, and this is what I meant earlier about my pride about, being in California, where, this is a short drive to come here. This is backyard. We're family, and so right, and so the California AG should be a leader on these issues. Yeah.
Great. Well, everyone, thanks so much, and Kamala, it's great to have you here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let's make sure it doesn't take a year and a half for the next time. And
That's
you're welcome.
not your fault.
You're welcome anytime.
Thank you.
So, thanks, and thanks everybody. Great
Thank
questions.
You all. Okay, let's sign that one.
Me and all my friends, we're all misunderstood. They say we stand for nothing and there's no way we ever could. Now we see